So do we start? Or do we wait for 1 more minute to start the session? Okay, I think we can start with the session. And today's session on contracts is about real estate contracts. Now, real estate contracts have a very significant aspect in the economy worldwide and also in the Indian context. Now, what happens in a real estate contracts? Before we get into what are the nitty-gritties of real estate contracts, I would like to say that real estate has been a major part of the Indian economy for the very reason that Indian economy is moving towards a lot of urbanization, and there is a lot of economic activity being happening from the last 20 years and to another many more decades. So these real estate transactions have to be formalized with what is called as the contracts. And these real estate contracts do have a lot of significance in our real estate transactions. The kind of transactions we enter into, they may be financial transactions, maybe investment transactions, or maybe kind of infrastructural development contracts. The infrastructural development has its own scenarios where the government has entered into a lot of real estate contracts, but we will learn it one by one. Now, when we talk about what is real estate, so there are three aspects of real estate. Real estate is not just about the land. It's about what can be built on land. Land is only something, is a very basic raw material. But what can be built on land is what the real estate talks about. So there are three kinds of real estates. That is, one is residential. On a land, available land resources, you can build residential houses, and you can have commercial complexes and industrial aspects. Now, what is the difference between these three? Residential is you build homes and apartments, right? But commercial and industrial, a lot of people tend to confuse between commercial and industrial. Commercial real estate transaction is only about your building of malls, if I can say it, building of commercial complex, or your multipurpose malls, or any other which gives you an importance of commercial activity. Now, industrial activity is not necessarily a commercial activity. It's about, if you have heard the government setting up of industrial parks, have you heard about government setting up economic free zones, special economic zones? So all these comes under industry. So when the government notifies a land to be an industrial park or an industrial zone, that becomes a real estate industrial matter. Now, commercial is your aspects of malls, and then where the cities and the urbanization aspect is happening, and these are the things of the commercial nature. Residential is your individual houses or apartments. So these three form the basic aspect of real estate contracts. Now what is the two major acts or the legislation which forms a legal framework for the real estate contracts? One is, of course, the Indian Contract Act of 1872, and another is the Transfer of Property Act. So these forms the major infrastructural activity of the real estate contracts. Now, what happens in these things? Now, we moving on to the next slide. Now, when we look into Indian Contract Act of 1872, now we would also try to understand that the basics of contracts is also applicable in the real estate contracts. Now, if you're a prospective buyer or a seller of a land, basically, now land has two important things in India, important legal aspects. One is you have agricultural land and you have non-agricultural land and you have forest land. Now, forest land has been entirely governed by a different government, a different department of the government altogether. Now, when you want to have a land transaction or a transfer of property transaction or a commercial transactions of the land, two aspects holds good for this argument. One is that you have agricultural land, other is the non-agricultural land. Now, whatever it is, when you are in a position of a purchaser or a seller, now offer and acceptance becomes a basic contractual obligation. Now, Section 2A and 2B of the Indian Contract Act, the buyer makes an offer or the seller accepts it. This is the basic requirement of a contract. Unless there is an offer and acceptance, there is no further progress on the contracts. Now, if you consider that you are a potential buyer or a seller, you make a basic offer and then your acceptance and other things continue. And there is a lawful consideration. Now, whatever your gift deed, you're not purchasing a gift deed. You're not, when a property comes to you through a gift deed, you're not purchasing it. So you're not a potential buyer or a seller. But to have a transaction has to be a lawful business, such as exchanging of cash. So when there is a monetary consideration, the real estate contracts has a value. So that is where your economic activity is considered in the real estate contracts. Now, consideration plays a significant role in making contracts legal and very much enforceable. Now, if you had paid money and you paid through and it constitutes to be a legal consideration, you have all the rights of enforceability of your rights of a property. Now, right to property is not a fundamental right. Right to property is a legal right. So anybody, for example, right to energy is right to electricity may be a fundamental right under Article 21, but right to property is not a fundamental right. It is a completely a legal right. So Section 25 of the Indian Contract Act says when you are a potential purchaser or when you're a potential seller, it says that your lawful consideration makes a very important aspect of a real estate contracts and real estate transaction.
Ma'am,
yes.
Could you just put your screen into a slideshow format?
Yeah, I'm not able to do that. So that's why.
No problem. Please proceed.
So, and then what happens next is your competence of the parties. Now, when we, during the course of this class, I would try to explain in more details of the competence of the parties. But just to understand what are the competence of the parties, of course, a minor cannot sell a land in his name, or a potential purchaser cannot purchase a land which is in the name of a minor. So that is a basic understanding of what you mean by a competence of parties. And what is a lawful object? Now, lawful object is that in the course of a real estate transaction, we do something called legal title search. Now, a lawful object means whatever your land, whether it is agricultural land or a non-agricultural land, it has to be a saleable and marketable product. Now, an agricultural land cannot be sold to build the houses without the conversion, and a non-agricultural land cannot be made into an agricultural purposes without the permission of the government. So, a lawful object is where it is a marketable title, and any person has a marketable title whether to sell or a purchase. Now, when you are a prospective buyer or a seller, and when you go to have a legal title search, the basic thing that whoever does or the bank requires or any other authority requires is that whether the object of transaction is a has a marketable title. So marketable title basically means the object is lawful. You have not obtained it through illegal means. Which is not yours, you're not able to sell it to others. So these four are mostly the basic of General Contracts Act and also the general requirement for the real estate contracts. So now moving further. Now, what do you mean by certainty? Now, any real estate contract must have a proper and certain, very definite terms, because when you're, for example, you buy a house of 30-40 dimension. Now, if it is a 30-40 dimension, you cannot mention in your contract it is 30 by 30. There is no certainty, right? When you have a transfer of property being sold in a very definite terms, because if your site is of 30-30 and you want to sell it for a 30-40, again, your monetary legal consideration depends on the land rate fixed by the government. So when there is no certainty of your property or the object of the object of transaction, and simultaneously your contract does not have a certainty of clauses, then there shall be a very improper real estate contract, and that leads to further more legal implications or implications on a prospective investor. Now here, land investment takes a lot of dimensions in India, because land forms the major raw material for any economic activity. Now land is very limited, and therefore the value of the land has been increasing day by day, either through inflation or through demand. So what happens is, when there is something called a legal requirement of a land, your aspect of prospective buyer or a purchaser depends on your certainty of the contracts which has been mentioned in your contractual terms. And of course, there has to be a written agreement in all land or the real estate deals, because these are the important aspect of most of the land and the land revenue matters are more prevalent in India because of its non-availability of proper records. For the last many years, there have been many transactions which not having a proper written agreement that deals with certain aspects of having a proper records in the land matters is very important. So whenever you are a prospective buyer or a seller of any land, you must look into the agreement, which is the safer option is having a written agreement. Now, these are also the general, I mean, if you look into section 73 of the Indian Contract Act, now there is earnest money clause. It is like where you have paid a booking amount, or a force majeure clause, which talks about when you have entered into a real estate contract where you want to take the possession of the object, the land, and where there is other aspects of force majeure clause, like where there is a delay in getting the possession. All these things do make a consideration in a general term. Now, what happens is, when you buy a land, either for a residential purpose or the government or for the commercial purposes, or when the land is earmarked by the government for industrial purposes, all these aspects do form a basic object of the real estate contracts. So these, unless you are very much confirmed and convinced about these aspects, you will get into a proper real estate contracts. Otherwise, the the enforceability of the real estate contracts with the basic terms, not for the non-availability of these basic clauses, might pose a lot of complications or a lot of hindrance for you to become a purchaser or a prospective purchaser or a seller. So if there is any, before I move on to what is dispute resolution or an indemnity clause, is there any question on this point of time? I would be able to answer that. I'd pause for a minute. Anybody has in the chat box? Okay. All of them are worried about the exam. That's good, because that gives you a lot of focus. That's fine. Okay. So I assume that you have understood this, because it's a very basic information on contracts. So when there is a dispute, this is the major aspect in a real estate contracts, because any contracts or any transaction involving the land matters have a lot of dispute, because one of the major disputes in the Indian courts is the land revenue matters or the land transaction matters. So under the Indian legislation framework, there is You have the court processes, which I'll deal with the later, and you have the Act of Arbitration and Conciliation. Now, with the inception of RERA, RERA deals with mostly the residential and the commercial aspects. So, and you also have Consumer Code, where these real estate contracts can be made enforceable through these kind of agreements. Now, moving on to the most important sector is the real estate contracts. What are the documents available for the real estate contracts? So anybody, I think all of you might have purchased land in one way or the other, or the owners of the land in one way or the other. So I would probably assume that you would know all these kind of legal documents available in your custody, whether it is your house or whether it is your land property. So I think the basic documents for these real estate contracts would be, you have an agreement for sale. When you are either a buyer of an apartment or buyer of any land or a site, so you would probably have initially the agreement of sale, which then converts into a sale deed, and then it makes you a potential purchaser, or you are an owner of the sale deed. Gives you a title of ownership. Now, have you come across, I think all of you might have read the sale deed documents when you buy an apartment, or when you buy a land, or when you buy, when you purchase any other real estate object. So, I mean, agreement for sale or a sale deed is the basic document for you to make sure that you are the owner of that land. So what happens when you don't have these, you are in the possession of the land, but you don't have these documents? Then there is a question of who is the owner of the land and who is in the possession of the land. That is for another set of legal requirements, which might be a prospective litigation aspect. But when you make sure that you have bought these land, you have an agreement for a sale and a sale deed in your custody, because these forms your basic title deed documents. What are title deed documents? Title deed documents are those which gives you an entitlement of the ownership of that property. So when you make a checklist, whenever you want to go to make a real estate contract transaction, so you please make a checklist that these are all the documents required for making you the appropriate owner of the land. Now, lease agreements. When you're not an owner of the any property you buy, you will probably have, when you have entered into a lease agreement or any rent agreement. So these are also, usually lease agreements are for commercial projects or industrial projects where the government gives the industrial land on lease. For example, if you go to the any of the lands given to the IT sector, most of the lands are given by the government on lease, because mostly the public policy states that government is the owner of the land and the land has to be used for the public purposes and not for the private interest. So most of the governments, when they enter into industrial park, or when they declare that some part of the land is an industrial zone or an industrial park, lease agreements are the basic document entered by the prospective lessees, and the government is the major landowner in those circumstances. So lease document forms the major aspect. So now, usually the government, why does the government give the land on lease? It's only because the ownership is not transferred, only the usage of the land, the right to use the land is given by the government. These are the basic rules of having, basic rules of land law, that when you are giving a land for any real estate transaction by the government, mostly the government prefers to give it on lease, because whenever there is a change of circumstances or a change of legislation, the government would require the land, and in the necessity of the land, the government has the power to take the land for the benefit of the society, a larger society, than for the benefit of a very private interest. So the government transactions mostly have lease agreements. Also, I'm not saying that lease agreements are mostly by the government, but they are also by the private parties to the government, to the contract in the real estate transaction. But mostly the lease agreements are done by the government, because the real owner of the land is the government, and the land resource is very limited. Now we have the geographical area of India is very limited. It has its boundaries, it has its natural boundaries, it has its demarcated boundaries. And whenever there is a requirement that the land has to be used for any other purposes other than the earmarks during the lease agreement, if the government feels that yes, it has to make the lease, it has to use the land for any other purposes, it has the sovereign power to take the land and then use it for any other purposes. And so that is the reason why the government mostly enters into lease agreements in the land related aspects. So what are the key real estate law in India? Now with the, I think there is something called a phase or kind of thing where the real estate regulation, before we would consider there are two important phases. One is before the enactment of RERA. The other phase is after the enactment of RERA. What has changed for the real estate contracts and real estate transactions in before and after the real RERA Act? Now, the RERA Act regulation. Now, if you look into the Act, please read into the words the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act. So, the qualifying words is regulation and development. Now, it does not say control. Real estate land control. It does not mean land control. The government did not bring the act to have a control on the land or the land resources. It does not want to control the land resources, or it does not want to control the land usage. These two are important aspects of the sovereign power of the land, of the government. Now, when it brought the real estate regulation and development, the regulation of what it means when you mean regulation. Regulation means you are regulating the real estate players. Those who are buyers of the land and those who are purchasers of the land, and the development, those who are developing the basic land into commercials or into residential zone. Now, when these players, before the RERA Act, there was no such regulation other than the municipal law, other than the law by the local governments. When they said, these are the areas earmarked for residential zone. So whoever wants to be a real estate business partner or real estate business wants to have a real estate business. So these are the land earmarked for residential. So build the land, build the houses. This is for commercial. So build the commercial complexes. And this is for industrial. Anyway, industrial lands are the monopoly of the government. So before the development of RERA, these were the norms. All the law related to the local government or the municipalities were the major government players in the development of real estate before the enactment of RERA. Now, the important milestone for the enactment of RERA has been that it has to protect the buyers. And there was no protection of buyers before the RERA Act came into picture. And there was no regulation of the land developers. Now, who are land developers? Land developers are those who develop the land either for a residential purpose or for the commercial purpose. So it's their right to trade, right to employment. So when they develop the land for any particular purposes, so they have to be regulated, especially in the city, urban, when there is a huge influx of migration. So urbanization is a natural result of huge influx of migration, because right to housing and right to shelter has been already declared by the government, by the court, to be a right, a fundamental right. So when there are inflection of migration and when you have urbanization, and to combat, actually, when there is an unplanned city planning, so these real estate developers or the land developers had to be regulated in a manner including the legal framework and their business conducting activities. So with these were the basic features why a RERA kind of act was enacted, so that these kind of things are regulated, but it does not mitigate the development. Now, when it says real estate regulation, of course, there is regulation, and also there is development of land. So development of land is the major economic activity, but the players in the development of land has to be regulated. That is the reason two qualifying words, it just did not say Real Estate Act. Imagine if it had only said Real Estate Act of 2016. What do you mean by Real Estate Act of 2016? So it only means that if there is only a Real Estate Act, it only meant, okay, there is land, you buy, whoever is a prospective buyer buys, whoever is a prospective seller sells. So that is a basic understanding of Real Estate Act. But when there are qualifying words like regulation and development, says that there shall be economic activity based on land and its usage, and also it has to regulate the players so that land is not an infinite resource. We know, okay, water can be in a way infinite resource. Wind is an infinite resource. Solar energy is an infinite resource. But the availability of land is not an infinite resource. So that is where your real estate understanding of real estate transaction comes into picture. Now, there is, if you keep looking at these government websites, sometimes they earmark it to be some kind of industrial zone. And after some purposes, after they find out that the industrial zone has reached to its maximum saturation, and there are other players, the housing requirement is more, the industrial zone can be converted into a residential purposes. So that is where the executive authority of the government is predominant in such areas. So government knows, and we all of us know, that the availability of land is not infinite. There must be a regulation, and in the process of development, land usage must be regulated, and the players of the real estate has to be regulated. And this is one of the basic reasons why a RERA Act kind of act was enacted. And to whether to understand the RERA Act is a success or not a success, or at least whether it's a game changer or not a game changer, or at least whether it has got some seriousness in the real estate players, I think the time can tell. I think from 2016 to 2025, there has been a lot of protection given to the buyers of the land and buyers of the residential properties and buyers of the commercial properties. So I don't know whether it is a game changer, but I think it has certainly brought a different understanding of real estate development, especially in the metropolitan cities or any other cities where the migration is much more than anticipated, and the planned development of land usage is the most important idea. Now, before the enactment of RERA Act, one I would like to bring to your notice, in the real estate transactions, before the enactment of RERA, the private players could have had land banks. For example, it was very rampant that these real estate developers used to buy from the purchasers at a very, very low rate and keep the lands with them, so that when there is a higher price, you make it into a profitable land sale. So these things have been curbed by the RERA Act. After the RERA Act, the only authority which can have a land bank is the government. For example, if you look into Karnataka has Karnataka Housing Board Development Authority, so that can have a land bank, but the players like Shobha developers or Mantri developers, if they have entered into an agreement by the prospective buyers for an apartment, they just can't buy the land and keep it and get into a speculation business or get into a transaction where they are just doing land sale, taking up from a very lower amount from the landowners, maybe the agricultural property or maybe the non-agricultural property. So the land banks cannot be created by the private players, after the enactment of the RERA Act. The only authority which can create a land bank and successfully own it and use it for any other land usage purpose is only the government or the government authorities or any authorities having the powers given by the government to enter into such land bank holdings. So the one of the greatest achievement of RERA Act has been the land banks. The private players have completely given away the authority to have land banks, taken away the complete authority to have land banks. Only the government can have something called land banks. Land banks essentially means owning the large tracts of land. So you buy acres of land from the people and you don't develop into whatever it is called, whatever you're intending to develop, either into a commercial project or into a housing project. So when you don't develop it, you just keep the land so that the land value increases and you sell them profit. So those things are essentially curbed after the Real Estate Regulation and Development Act has been enacted. So that is where the question of regulation and the question of development comes into picture. Okay, at this point, any questions? If you want any questions in the chat box, I can pause for a minute. So different states have different RERA. So every state has a RERA authority. So Karnataka has Karnataka Real Estate Regulation Development Act authority. Maharashtra has Maharashtra RERA, and every state has its own RERA authority, which also acts as the RERA court for all the real estate transactions which comes under its purview. So I would just wait for a minute if anybody has a question. Or anybody has an important point to make at this time.
Yeah, ma'am, one point regarding the builders, they can buy a big parcel of land and then develop it and then sell the land in smaller parcels. That is allowed.
Sir, I could not hear your voice.
No, I said the real estate developers can buy a big plot of land in acres and then develop it and then sell it off as smaller parcels of land. That is allowed.
See, RERA comes into picture only when you make a building and sell it.
So these are not covered under RERA?
Only if you buy land for the sale for the purpose of selling the land, that the RERA does not apply.
Okay, thank you.
Now, if you are just a land developer to sell sites, you buy 5 acres of land, you make some 50 sites, you're not a RERA, you're not supposed to be a RERA compliant.
Okay.
So that is where the development of land question comes. Development of land, on the land availability, you build something and you sell it as for a commercial purpose.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
So any other question? Are there any apartment builders here? Or who have given their lands for building an apartment? Are they registered under RERA? Okay, so moving on. Now, another important real estate law is your Transfer of Property Act. Now, Transfer of Property Act is a very important basic land-related legislation. Now, to have this Transfer of Property Act in the picture of a real estate transaction, it includes any property which is as described as a land. Now, initially I told you land is of 3 importance. One is agricultural, non-agricultural, and forest land. Now, we are not dealing with forest land. It's forest land has a very different authority and very different, it's a very thing where forest land, to convert a forest land or to have an encroachment of forest land is a different law altogether. Now we are only dealing with agricultural and non-agricultural land. Now basically the assumption is that everything is an agricultural land. Only after you convert an agricultural land for a non-agricultural purpose. Now the government does not say in the land law, the government does not say what is not, it does not say agricultural converted into residential. No, it only says you have agricultural land. You want to develop that land, please convert it into non-agricultural. So non-agricultural includes residential, includes commercial, includes industrial, which means that anything which is not used for agriculture purpose. Now that is the basis of land development. Because once you say agricultural land, you must have any agricultural activity being done on that land. Basically, one is for your taxation purpose, one is for your assessment purpose, and an agricultural land right to food is a basic fundamental right for everyone. Right to property is a legal right, but right to food is a basic purpose, basic legal right, basic fundamental right. Sorry. So to make an agricultural land convert into a non-agricultural purposes, which becomes a real estate transaction. Now, agricultural land, essentially when it is converted into a non-agricultural purpose, it does not, as I mentioned earlier, it does not say whether it is residential or commercial. That the different authority comes into picture when once you make it into non-agricultural purposes, whether you want to make it residential, your RERA Act comes into picture. When you want to make it commercial, your RERA Act comes into picture, and also your local governments which make these land-related law where the land use compliance is there. I will just talk about it in a minute. So all these comes into picture. So an agricultural to non-agricultural is the basic requirement of land use policy. When you don't have this kind of conversion, then your legal title in a real estate is a flawed legal title. You do not have a very marketable title. So when I say marketable title, you cannot sell an agricultural land as a non-agricultural land. That is not a real estate transaction. It's an illegal transaction. So when you cannot sell a non-agricultural land as an agricultural land, that is not a real estate transaction. It is again an illegal transaction, right? So an agricultural and non-agricultural forms the basis of the land transaction. And if you are still in a land agricultural transaction, agriculture to agriculture is not a real estate transaction. Non-agricultural transaction of land is the real estate transaction. So somebody asked me a very valid question. If you buy a property, if you buy land and you want to sell it as a land, maybe a site or maybe a particular property which is not built, there is no built up area, either an apartment or there is no built up area of a commercial nature, then does it comes under RERA? The first question is that transaction does not come under RERA, but that transaction is not also an agricultural land usage transaction. A real estate transaction only comes into picture when the land is not of an agricultural nature. Only when you convert it into a non-agricultural purposes, then the starting point of a real estate transaction is that you are not doing anything on the agricultural land except farming and agricultural activity. Now, when you say a cold storage, for example, you have built a cold storage on an agricultural land is also a real estate transaction. To build a cold storage in an agricultural land, you must convert into a non-agricultural purposes. You must go to the government department, the relevant government department. In Karnataka, it is the district commissioner or the collector of the district has the authority to convert the land to a non-agricultural purposes. If you say, I have a land of 5 acres, but I've built it for agricultural storage, agricultural product storage, no, it is not an agricultural land activity. Unless the land says, the records and the land revenue says the land is an agricultural land, you cannot use it for any land non-agricultural purposes. The basis of real estate transaction, when you look into your document details, please find out whether your land in the land revenue records. For example, Karnataka has the Land Revenue Act, Land Records Act. So under these land records, if any land is purported to be an agricultural land, unless converted, it cannot be made use for a non-agricultural purposes. So are you clear on this? Yes. So the basis of your any land transaction is agricultural, non-agricultural. Agricultural transaction is not agricultural transaction on an agricultural land is not a real estate transaction. A land transaction, land usage transactions is a real estate transaction. Then comes the picture of Registration Act. Now, what is the purpose of Registration Act? Again, when a document only showing to be a owner of the land shows that you have registered the property under your name, it gives a valid title of that you're owner of that real estate. Now, when you are the owner of an agricultural land, you do not have a Registration Act. Only when there is a sale of land to land, your Registration Act comes into picture. And when you're having a land transaction of a commercial nature and you want to buy, you're a prospective buyer or a seller, your Registration Act comes into picture, because this is one act which gives you a legal title of ownership. After your Transfer of Property Act, your second valid title comes from your Registration Act. So unless your property is registered, whether if you're a buyer, you have to get it registered in your name, gives you a valid title. If you are a seller, you have to see whether the land is registered in a prospective seller's name. So that is where your essential title entitlement as an owner comes into picture. Unless you're not sure of a registration of the property, whether the property is registered or non-registered, you're not sure of your legal title and legal ownership. Now, agricultural land do not say it is registered. If you look into some property matters of 30 years, 40 years before, your transfer of agricultural land came through inheritance or came through some kind of succession. Your patta was the major land revenue document. And your not registered property or a sale deed was not your major transaction document for an agricultural land. So only when after an agricultural land is converted, your Registration Act or your registered sale deed, what you call is it. Now, if you look into your forefathers or having, they did not have a registered land sale deed of an agricultural land. It came either through succession, inheritance, and it was transferred, the title of ownership was transferred through a patta or an RTO. Sorry, not an RTO, RTI. So these things are different documents. So when you understand the essential differences of a transaction of an agricultural land and transaction of a real estate property. Now, Registration Act is one of your act which gives you a legal entitlement of an ownership. So I think you're clear till this time. Has anybody posed a question in the chat box, or you want to talk anything about this? So next is your Indian Stamp Act. Do you pay stamp duty when you have a when you do the registration of any land? Obviously, yes, we do pay a stamp duty so that it is a kind of revenue generation to the government. Now, any transaction must have a paid amount as stamp duty, right? So when you are getting as much as you pay the tax, or you pay for a GST when you're trading, or before GST you are paying VAT, and you pay your income tax. Like that, Indian Stamp Act is a kind of revenue generation to the government. It is on one aspect, it is a kind of revenue generation to the government. But on the other aspect, it's that you are the owner of that land and you have bought it by paying a valid amount to the government. You have not bought it through an illegal means. So Indian Stamp Act, what is the amount of stamp duty? The valuation is done by the state government. for a residential purpose land, for a residential real estate, the valuation is of a different amount. For the commercial, it is of a different amount. So an amount paid under the Indian Stamp Act also says that your transfer of property or your registration of the sale transaction or any other real estate transaction has been validated by the government by paying an amount of tax through Stamp Act. There might be two things. One, you are valuated the government rate, or you have undervalued the government rate. For whatever it is, you pay that stamp duty to the government, and paying as much as you say, like, I have paid my taxes. It is saying you have paid the government duty, and that forms one of your valid and legal sale transaction. If you have not paid your stamp duty, it does not constitute a legal or a valid transaction. Only after you have paid a valid stamp duty through a registration happening, then only your transaction is considered to be valid and valid for all legal purposes, for all government purposes. So that is the reason the Stamp Act is, on the one side, not just a revenue generation to the government, but it is also a kind of giving you a valid title in your real estate or the land transactions. Okay. So please see that stamp duty valuation, you have paid the stamp duty as per the valuation and not as per your own calculation. So that takes a lot of that makes a lot of difference. And another is your Benami Transaction Act. That's not much so important, but it is one of the land related law. So that whoever buys the land in some other's name, which is so prevalent, but still, even for a Benami transaction, you do registration, you do stamp, you pay the stamp duty, and all these things have to be followed. Only when there is a question of who is the owner, then the Benami Transaction Act can be applied to check who is the real owner and who has masked himself to be an owner through somebody else. So that is just I just wanted to make it as a passing comment to the real estate law in India. But the major legislative framework is the, apart from RERA, is your Transfer of Property Act, your Registration Act, and your Indian Stamp Act, where you pay a valid stamp duty to the government and say proudly that, yes, I'm the owner of this land, I have paid my duty. Now, okay, I think what is the question here? Okay. I'm not able to read this. Okay, this is a discussion happening. Right. Okay. So now, another important is, what are your due diligence, in the sense, when you want to get into a real estate contract. So please don't forget, whenever I say a real estate contract, it is a non-agricultural sale transaction and not an agricultural sale, agriculture to agricultural sale transaction. Okay. So that's not a real estate. So now, what is your importance of due diligence? What do you mean by due diligence? Due diligence means your precautionary matters that you have taken before buying a property or a land. So the first thing, as I've been saying from when I started explaining these real estate contracts, is your title verification. So title verification is what gives you the most important entitlement of who is the real owner. Now, title verification starts from how did a potential seller get the property from, either through inheritance, either through succession, or by act of legislation is also a kind of being a owner of the land. For example, the government can grant land to certain people, to certain section of the people. So it gives a land grant title to the prospective, whoever it has to be given to, so certain section of the people who requires land. So those kind of people will be given grant land status. So those grant land status comes with certain restrictions for further transactions. So for example, if a land is granted to any forest dwellers, it has its own restrictions of further usage of land or further land transaction. But if it is given to a certain section of the society, where, for example, the scheduled caste, there is a specific act which says land grant can be given to the scheduled caste or any other sections of the society, they come with certain restrictions. So what are those restrictions? For example, when you have a land grant, you cannot sell them for a period of either 10 years or for a period of 15 years. So there will be certain conditions under which the government will give you a grant land. It shall not be prospectively sent for another 10 years, 15 years. Grant land has its own conditions to be sold further, to have its own sale transactions in the further things. So if that is a grant land, you just can't look into the title. You just have to look what are the conditions attached to the land grant. So that is one of the important aspects of checking your valid title holding. Now, what is the other? Then you have your, for real estate, you have your khata, but for the agricultural land, you have your patas. All these are the documents of your title verification. So but a lot of people would want to confuse with your tax paid receipt. Your tax paid receipt is not a legal title verification document. Tax paid receipt is only that you are paying tax to the government. So tax paid receipt, anybody can pay the tax. So your title verification is mainly the khata, you're mainly the other documents which I have been telling to you in these aspects. Now, what is an encumbrance certificate? What is the encumbrance certificate? Your EC, have you heard people talking about EC? EC is the document which says whether your property has been mortgaged or whether your property is a grant property or whether your property has been mortgaged or set on lease to anybody who is not a prospective buyer. So when your EC is clear of such mortgage or such things of, then your title verification can be, you can understand that your title is of a legal and valid title. So usually banks check these things, whether when they grant loans for the prospective buyers, they check these things, whether there is encumbrance certificate has any kind of encumbrances. Encumbrances essentially means whether you have given it under lease or you're mortgaged it, so that if you have mortgaged it, you do not have a marketable title. So you're hiding something from them. So you do not have a marketable title to the real estate transaction. Now, what is land use compliance? So this is essentially where the local governments or the Town and Country Planning Act of the local government comes into picture. So all these have to be complied when you are using a real estate, when you are getting into a real estate transaction. So you have to check whether these land use compliances have been done by the prospective seller to a prospective buyer. And again, building approvals, all these buildings do have, the local governments get into buildings approvals. You must have this kind of space for ventilation, this kind of space has to be left. And what is your built up area, what is your total area of the land, what is your built up area, and what can be to essentially you can utilize your free space, how much of your free space can be utilized, what is the amount of floors that you can build, whether it's a ground floor, first floor, second floor. Usually residential purposes, houses will be given the maximum of 3 floors. The apartments will be given some kind of floors. So all these building approvals should be looked into when you are having into a real estate transaction. And these forms an important part of your contract of real estate. So I think these things are clear. So generally, what I would say is, when again, this common disputes in real estate transactions is your title defects. When you don't, what all I have been saying for the previously, if you don't check into all these things, you will have title defects. or you will have delay in possession, which leads to breach of contract, and there may be some fraud where your property is not sold as whatever it is intended to be, and unregistered agreements. All these are common disputes in real estate contracts. That is why your title search or your compliances to the local governments must be a major part of your real estate transaction. Okay, so I think it's already 7:56. If anybody wants to say something or you have any questions, we can answer that, and that should be the presentation for today.
Madam, I have one question.
Yes.
Any agricultural land can be firstly converted to non-agricultural land and then can be sale for this development. So how do I convert? Because every agricultural land there, we have to build something, then only it will be converted. Something, sorry.
No, it is not like that. When you convert into a non-agricultural purpose, for example, I told in Karnataka, you should have a district collector or a district commissioner is the authority to convert an agricultural to non-agricultural purposes. So you must approach an appropriate authority of your state who will convert into a non-agricultural purpose and then further convert into residential or non-residential or commercial.
Okay, got your point, madam. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. And one more thing, in RERA Act, how it correlates with 2 points. One is Consumer Protection Act and one is Societies Act. Because whenever I was working with real estate companies, I heard about this. So can you enlighten me a bit in this way? In this regard?
Yes. Now, how the RERA correlates with first your Societies Act. Now, all I told you, Karnataka state housing societies. Okay, if they are into only land development or site development, they need not be registered in RERA. But when they are into making residential houses or complexes, they should be registered under the RERA.
Okay.
Even if it is a society, not just private developers. Now, the recent act has also said when you have BDA, for example, Bangalore Development Authority is the nodal authority to build government houses under the government schemes. So the BDA also has to be registered under the RERA if they are development of land to residential houses. Okay. Now, second, how it correlates with the consumer protection. Now, when you are a prospective buyer or when you've already paid some amount to a buyer, now the consumers can approach either the consumer court for your enforcement of rights or can go to the RERA court.
Okay.
For the compliance and enforcement matters.
Which one is much more efficient? What is your Consumer Protection Act? I presume it will be overburdened rather than RERA.
Yes, I think RERA has RERA has the precautionary aspects. So that was the reason why RERA was enacted. So in spite of all your precautionary aspects, if you if you are facing the problems of land purchase, the residential houses or apartment purchase, I think consumer court can be an option.
Okay, got your point. Thank you.
Okay.
Ma'am, I think given the time constraint that we have, I think we can conclude the lecture.
Okay. Yeah, we can actually.
Yes.
Thank you, madam. Thank you for a wonderful question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So friends, thank you everyone for being a part of this lecture. It was really nice to have all of you with us in this entire course. The advanced contracts and public procurement. Well, we just have one thing to share with all of you, that anyone who is interested in a critical natural resources workshop that is also being hosted with NPTEL can sign up for the same. I'm sharing the link in the group. On behalf of Professor Sairam Bhat, entire team, CERA and NLS, we thank NPTEL and IIT Madras for their constant support, and of course to the learners who have been there with us in this entire journey. In case there are any doubts or anything, you can reach us over our email, and the queries in the discussion forum will be addressed because they're subjective in nature. So thank you, ma'am, for sharing your insights with us. Thank you, Vikas, for being there in the session. The entire NPTEL team for holding the third live session. Thank you, everyone. And with this, we take a leave from your end.